They talk about coal and gas as a major resource. Water is our most crucial resource by a long, long way. And if we don't protect our water, we're doomed, in my opinion.
When our leaders fast, then ordinary people are going to become heroes.
When it comes to protecting our communities and our environment from mining, we know that up until now, the states have failed us.
We know that a small number of our federal MPs are making an effort to protect the places we love, our communities, our farmland, our bushland.
But to see real change, we know a lot more needs to be done. Best of all, we know a lot more can be done.
That's why this year we're taking our message to the federal MPs. We're making sure they can't overlook what we're asking them.
We're taking our call to the door of their electoral office. We're meeting them in our communities right across the country.
It's time for them to listen to us and to represent us.
Right around Australia right now, the peoples are asking for real protection over our lands, our water and our air.
We need real action, not just talk.
To protect our water. To protect our future.
This is what we care about, the future.
The whole of Australia is our backyard.
And that's why we've locked our gates, because we just love where we live.
And this is why we're working with our neighbours to declare our communities coal mine and gas field free.
And we're preparing to defend our country, road by road, valley by valley. For too long, our federal parliament has hidden behind the states. Well, enough is enough.
We know our federal parliament has the power to protect all our communities from reckless coal mining and gas drilling. That's why we demand reform.
No time for talk. Action. Country is calling. It's now.
Good evening and welcome on behalf of the University of Sydney and 350.org. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's upon their ancestral lands that the University of Sydney has been built, and we acknowledge that this has been a place of learning and exchange for 50,000 years, and we honor that memory as we continue that tradition. My name is David Schlossberg. I'm a professor of environmental politics and director of the Sydney Network on Climate Change and Society here at the University of Sydney. We are absolutely thrilled to be a co-sponsor of this event and look forward to more collaborations with 350.org, with activist students, with the city, and with the public. So thanks for coming and for participating in this absolutely necessary conversation. So I'm just here to welcome you, to lay out the way the evening is going to work, and then introduce the introducer of our speaker tonight. First up, our Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, will give an introduction of Bill. Bill's going to talk for about a half an hour and then take some questions, and then continue on with the talk and the call to action. So don't leave during question time, because the good stuff comes after that as well. Clover Moore should need no introduction. If Bill McKibben is the rock star of the environmental movement, Clover Moore is the queen of green cities, one of the leading figures in the global movement to make urban living more sustainable, more social, more enjoyable, more rewarding. From bike lanes to tri-generation to urban gardens, Clover is leaving her mark on the city, and a city that will leave less of a mark on the environment in which it sits. And so with that, please welcome the Lord Mayor of Sydney, Clover Moore.
Thank you for that very nice welcome, David, and hello everyone, and it's good to see you here tonight, and I too thank you for coming. And I also would like to acknowledge the original custodians of our land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and also acknowledge the people of the 200 nationalities who live in our city. It's a real pleasure for us to welcome Bill McKibben to Australia and to Sydney. A writer, an environmentalist, an educator, and importantly, an activist. He's been working to shake governments and populations out of their lethargy since the 1980s. In 1989, his book, The End of Nature, was one of the first to alert the general audiences to the catastrophe that still awaits us. His success in exposing the central role of the fossil fuel industries can be gauged from the attempts to dismiss him as a purveyor of fear. In addition to his books and other writings, Bill has also founded Step It Up and, of course, 350.org, and has been described as, and I quote, one of the 26 visionaries changing our world. He is persuasive on the need for urgent action, and as inaction at the top levels of government continues, and depressingly so here in Australia, the need for action to address our situation becomes only more urgent. Despite the conferences and the international murmurings that something should be done, so very little has changed. Over the last few years, we have seen CO2 emissions rising, the Arctic ice melting, the oceans becoming more acidic. In 2011, within the space of weeks, Australia experienced a record heat wave, atrocious bushfires in one part of the country, and devastating floods in another, which inundated an area equivalent to France and Germany combined. And none of our leaders were talking about climate change. Our extraordinary Great Barrier Reef is at risk. Our ability to feed ourselves for the long term, as well as to export to other countries, is coming into question. And we are starting to count the cost in human and dollar terms. In 2011, the Queensland floods left a damage bill of $30 billion. And still no one talked about climate change. While it was reported that in 2006, as long as the drought dragged on in the Murray-Darling Basin, a farmer suicided every 4 days. The challenges are so immense, it's perhaps tempting to simply turn one's back. The City of Sydney, however, believes we must face those challenges and do whatever we can to achieve change. And cities play an important role in achieving this change. We're the centres of population, and we are responsible, directly and indirectly, for the vast majority of emissions. What we do here in Sydney can contribute significantly to reducing Australia's emissions. Our Sustainable Sydney 2030 strategy is already helping us to achieve our ultimate goal of a 70% reduction in emissions by 2030. We're doing extensive work to identify the lowest cost and the most effective options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and are pursuing a suite of strategies for our own organisation and across our local government area. Reducing and avoiding energy use is always the best option and the first option. A retrofit of 45 council buildings is cutting energy costs by 23%, and our rollout of energy-efficient LED lights is cutting our emissions from our street lighting by 51%. We became Australia's first carbon-neutral council in 2008, and we continue to monitor emissions, to find ways to avoid or reduce energy use, to install renewable energy on our properties, and to offset unavoidable emissions. And we're literally greening the city with extensive tree plantings. Although, you know, I've just had all these letters from Rosebery. They don't want us to plant trees down the centre of their street because they'll drop leaf litter. So we're literally greening the city with extensive tree plantings and new or improved green spaces, even in Rosebery, creating cycling paths and community gardens, and working with the owners of commercial and residential buildings on a variety of programs to retrofit their building stock to make it more sustainable. And I was talking to someone just a week ago who lives in a Meriton building in Redfern, and they've been working with us on our green apartment program, and she claimed they reduced their costs by 90%. I met someone else today who said that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's certainly, they're making great strides forward. And of course, after many years of research and advocacy, we appear to have finally won the state government's agreement to introduce light rail as a cleaner and more sustainable form of inner city transport. I believe that given the right leadership, that it is possible to achieve change. People will adapt their lifestyles towards a more sustainable future for themselves and for their children. They need those leaders, and they need to be taken on the journey. But, you know, from us it requires constant advocacy, constant reminders of the peril we otherwise face. It requires great champions like Bill McKibben, and so once again, I offer him a very warm welcome to Sydney. Thank you. Bill is going to come on presently, but first of all, there's a brief presentation on 350.org. So thanks, everyone.
Hi, I'm Blair Palazzi with 350.org, and thanks for coming here tonight to hear Bill McKibben and the Do the Maths tour for Australia. I first heard about 350 when they were organizing out of the US a global day of action on climate change. The idea was to put the number 350 all over the world to get people talking about what it meant and what we had to do to try and protect the planet against the increasing greenhouse gases. We did an event at the Sydney Opera House with more than 2,000 people on the steps, and it was one of those images that kicked off the day and made international media around the world. There were more than 5,200 events happening everywhere from little small locations in Asia and Africa to London, Paris, and New York City. It was a great day, and it really galvanized the public to get thinking about what it meant and what we could all do. CNN called it the world's biggest day of direct action, and we were really pleased to start off that way, and now we're taking it from there. As time's gone by, 350.org has hosted the largest work party the planet has ever seen. People of every nation but North Korea came together to put solar panels on their roofs and dig community gardens. We've also done the world's biggest art exhibition in history, as people came together to form images so big they could be viewed from space, including our own artwork here in Australia in the red earth of Broken Hill. These mobilizations demonstrated something powerful. Looking through the thousands of pictures that poured in that day and across the world for all these events, you saw people of almost every nationality, class, and color transcending their differences to speak a common language and to call for action on climate change. Despite our supposed differences, we were really becoming a movement together. In the past few years, we've seen 350.org mature, especially in the US, where they've taken on the fight over the Keystone Pipeline. It's a plan to extract oil from shale and pipeline it from Canada all the way to the south of the US. It's incredibly energy intensive and a really bad idea for the planet if you're concerned about climate change. In the United States, 350.org has organized thousands of people to come out against the Keystone Pipeline. On one day alone, some 50,000 people turned out in Washington to call on President Obama not to support the plan. And 28 people were arrested on that day, showing sign of civil disobedience and the time to step up and take action on climate. That's why we're bringing Bill McKibben to Australia, because we're the next country that really is posing one of the biggest problems to our planet. Australia's massive plans to extract and export coal around the world is really a threat to the planet and something we need to take action against. That's why we're bringing Bill McKibben to Australia and why we've started the Do the Maths tour here. Bill's here to talk about what we can all do to try and stop this problem, namely, look at where our money is, look to divest it from fossil fuels, and look to move it to the clean energy economy. Thanks for coming tonight and to hear Bill and what we can all do to take action. We're working here and around the world to see how we can take the fossil fuel industry on head on. It'll mean all of us need to get much more active. So we're hoping after tonight's talk, you'll do more than just sign petitions or make a phone call. You might actually join us in the effort to stop fossil fuel expansion. So we hope to see you after tonight. Join us, and thanks again for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you, Blair. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm afraid that you're guinea pigs tonight. This is the first time we've done this, and against all better judgment, among other things, they've entrusted me with running the technology. And it may not be pretty. You've listened. I feel a little bad because you've listened to these wonderful, kind words, and I especially thank the Lord Mayor for all that she said, but also all that she has done over the years. You've heard all these kind words. You may have had too good an impression of me and what I'm up to. I'm going to play you one or two other things just to kind of balance that. Last week, in honor of my arrival, I hear the CEO of the coal industry gave a little talk. Let's see if we can hear the audio here. Well, no. I told you there'd be trouble, and right away. Aaron, thank you.
They arrived at the view, or whether the facts upon which they rely are really facts at all. Now, 12 hours after Mr. McKibben's comments were reported, ABC TV referred to North Korea as a rogue state. And that made me think, is it possible that the Australian coal industry really bears any comparison to a demented autocracy that is threatening the world with nuclear war? Surely the answer's no, but it's clear that Mr. McKibben's worldview, with its very halo-like characteristics of zeal and authenticity, has gained credence in the public domain. And this has, in turn, profoundly influenced the policy sphere. So I want to suggest tonight that there's a very big difference between protesting for what you value and fundamentalist eco-activism. The war against coal and fossil fuels in the name of climate should really be exposed for what it is, an attempt to snooker development by stealth.
There you are. She has a point. But even so, it struck me that there was more to be said. I wanted to bring you sort of a voice, another almost Australian voice, not quite. This one, one of the great gifts that Australia gave to my country over the years was Rupert Murdoch, and his news channel. This was a little thing that they ran a few weeks ago, and I thought I'd better play it for you too, just so you have a full accounting of exactly what it is you might be getting into here.
Just a quick recap. Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez is still dead. All right. So Stanley Kurtz at National Review is reporting on the left-wing campaign to have college endowments divest their holdings in fossil fuel companies. The movement so far has infected 250 campuses, featuring the crown jewels of hipster protest, sit-ins, building seizures, and hunger strikes. Which leads me to one point about student hunger strikes. Let them starve for a while. Seriously, they could stand to lose a few pounds. But divestment is part of a larger, mustier goal found in teachers' lounges, killing America. It's a movement to upend progress, which to them is code for American domination. Look at its leader, Bill McKibben, who's also blocking the Keystone Pipeline. It's a coercive ideology, a banishment of consuming, forcing you to return to a communal lifestyle, no cars, no stores, no clean underwear.
And here's the sad truth, Qantas lost my suitcase, so that that underwear thing is a little truer than I... All right, now you know the truth about me. And so we can get to work. I want to begin by saying that, in a sense, none of us should have to be here tonight. If this planet worked the way that it should, then we wouldn't have to sort of go to extreme measures to deal with the problems that we faced. 25 years ago, I got to write the first book about all of this, and 25 years ago, the world's scientists started telling us what the problem was, how serious it was, and what we needed to do about it. If things worked the way they should, that's precisely the point at which our leaders would have taken the necessary action to get us started in the right direction. We would not have solved global warming by now. We'd be well on the way to solving it. But nothing like that happened. We've taken, as the Lord Mayor said, very little action over those 25 years. And so those of us who know and care about this issue, we have no choice at this point but to start stepping up, and stepping up in a more serious way than we have so far. And that's why this night seems important to me. I'm so glad to be in Australia and to bring this same message that we brought all around the United States a few months ago. We did this in almost every city in the country. I feel as if, for me, it may be the start of the last campaign, in a sense, that I get to fight. Not because I'm too tired to go on, though tonight I'm a little jet-lagged, but because the planet's getting tired, because the moment has come really to make a stand. We're reaching the limits, we're running out of time, but that doesn't depress me. In a sense, I'm more excited than I've ever been, because I think increasingly we know what we need to do. I think we've peeled away the layers of the onion and we've gotten to the heart of things. Really, I think as of now, as of tonight, we've got to go after the fossil fuel industry. That's the point. That industry now is trying to wreck the future. The work that we've got to do to go after them won't all be exciting. Some of it will be. Some of you may need to go to jail before this is all over. But there's a lot of dry, hard labor too, a lot of Facebooking and petition gathering and all that sort of thing. And I can't promise you that we'll be victorious. Though I'm not, as I say, discouraged. The other day in the States, a reporter was interviewing me, and in a kind of skeptical reporter way, was saying, oh, really, isn't this a kind of David and Goliath fight you guys are engaged in? You're up against the richest industry on earth. And I was, oh, yeah, that sounds bad, and I was sort of, oh. And then I thought, no, I actually am a Sunday school teacher. I know how David and Goliath comes out, actually, in the end, If we fight hard enough, we've got a chance. No promises, but a real chance. So let's get to work. Let's actually do the maths for a minute. We're calling it that. And don't worry, happily, the math isn't, it's not calculus, okay? It's not that hard. In fact, I wrote about it. I sort of got this started almost a year ago, writing a story for Rolling Stone that went sort of strangely viral. It was in those of you who keep your back issues, it was in the one with Justin Bieber on the cover. Okay. But here's the thing. I got a call the next day from the editor of the Rolling Stone saying, this is strange, but your piece has 10 times as many likes on Facebook as Justin Bieber's, okay? Which I think, has a good deal to do with my kind of soulful stare, but really more it's because we kind of nailed the math, and we're going to go over those numbers in a minute. here's the place where we begin, just to make sure we're on the same page. So far on this Earth, we've burned enough coal and gas and oil to raise the temperature 1 degree, okay? And what has that done? Last September, the headline in the paper said half the polar ice cap is missing. Literally. I mean, if Neil Armstrong were up on the moon today looking down, he would see half as much ice in extent as he saw 40 years ago. And in fact, since the ice is much thinner now, about 80% by volume is gone. Think about that. We've taken one of the great physical features on Earth and we've broken it. And it's not the only one. Think about the oceans. Because the chemistry of seawater changes as it absorbs CO2, the Atlantic and the Pacific and all the 7 seas are 30% more acidic than they were 40 years ago. Think about the atmosphere. If you want one fact to kind of understand this century we're now moving into, it's simply that warm air holds more water vapor than cold, and as a result, the atmosphere already is about 5% wetter than it was 40 years ago. That is a staggering change in a basic physical parameter of the Earth, perhaps the single best sign that we've moved out of the Holocene, out of that 10,000-year period of benign climatic stability that underwrote the rise of human civilization. What that extra moisture in the atmosphere does is load the dice for both drought and for flood. In my country last year, we had the hottest summer we've ever had, and it simply was too hot to grow food in the richest farmland on the whole face of the earth, you know. And not only that, when that summer came to an end, we saw the greatest storm that in the northern hemisphere we'd ever seen, the widest wind field we'd ever measured as Hurricane Sandy moved up the eastern seaboard of the United States and smashed into our greatest, biggest, most diverse, beautiful, cosmopolitan city, the kind of Sydney of the United States, you know. And it looked horrifying. It looked so wrong, so sad. To see the water pouring into ground zero, to see it pouring into the subway system. It looked as wrong as the whole world is sort of starting to look. And that's because 1 degree is too much, too much. Long term, we've got to get CO2 back below 350 parts per million. I wish that that's what we were talking about tonight. I wish we were talking about stopping things, reversing them, but we don't have that luxury. We've already changed the world. We've already changed the world, and all we're talking about now is figuring out how to avoid complete calamity. So here's how the world's powers have defined complete calamity. Really the only number we've ever agreed on about climate change, 2 degrees Celsius warming. That's what people have decided. So far 1 degree, we're crazy to go to 2, but that's where we're going, even if we start doing everything right now. And as I say, it's the only thing that people have agreed on. The world's leaders in the G20 and the G8 and everything else have set that target. When we had the failed climate accord at Copenhagen, the only thing that came out of that, I mean, we met for 2 weeks and there was no targets and no enforcement and no timetable. The only thing was an agreement that 2 degrees Celsius was where we were going to try to stop. And everybody signed on. The EU, Japan, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, Australia. The most conservative countries, even the United States, signed on. Okay? If the world officially believes anything about climate change, it's that 2 degrees is too much. So in this math, that's the first number to hold in your head, 2 degrees. Okay? Second number, 565. 565 gigatons, 565 billion tons. That's how much, more or less, the scientists have told us that we can pour into the atmosphere and have a realistic hope of staying below 2 degrees. That's our carbon budget, as it were, going forward. The number comes from a 2009 paper by a German scientist named Meinhausen, but it's been confirmed by many other models at this point. It sounds like a lot, okay? I mean, it is a lot. 565 billion tons. Trouble is, the world emits 30 gigatons a year already. That number is increasing 3% a year. Hey, if you do the math, in about 14 years, we blow past that threshold, okay? That's very, very bad news. Here's David Caroli from University at Melbourne explaining a little bit about what it means.
Scientists have been studying the relationship between global increases in carbon dioxide and temperature. And there is a clear relationship. But they've also now got a clear understanding that it is the cumulative emissions of carbon dioxide that set the level of temperature, because carbon dioxide variations are long-term. Carbon dioxide has a long time before it gets removed from the atmosphere through natural processes. What that means is there's a limit in terms of fossil fuels that can be burnt if we want to stay below 2 degrees of global warming.
That limit, 565 gigatons. It's a scary number. We go past it in 14 years. But the really scary number is the third one. It's the reason I wrote that piece for Rolling Stone, and really the reason, in a sense, that I'm here tonight. That number is 2,795 gigatons. A year or so ago, a team of financial analysts in the UK did the work that we probably should have done long ago. They went through all the stock exchange filings and all the annual reports, and they added it all up. And they figured out that the world's fossil fuel companies and the countries that operate like fossil fuel companies, think Kuwait or Venezuela, already had in their reserves, identified, mapped, priced, ready to go, 2,795 gigatons. The important thing about that number is it's 5 times as much as 565. It's not even close, okay? That's how much CO2 we had in 1750 before the Industrial Revolution. That's how much we've burned so far. It's raised the temperature a degree. That's how much we can go and stay below 2 degrees. And that's what the reserves look like at the moment. Once you know those numbers, then you have a full sense of where we are, okay? And where we are is in a hell of a lot of trouble, because these guys plan to burn all of that. That's what their business plans say. That's for a Shell or an Exxon or a Billiton. That's what they set their share price on. That's what they borrow money against. That's their plan. Unless we figure out a way to intervene, then the end of this story is very clear. There's no longer any room for doubt or speculation or wishful thinking. Stories are written. And what those numbers show, and this is the part I really want to make clear, is that they are a rogue force. At this point, they're outlaws, not against the laws of the state. Too often the fossil fuel industry gets to write those laws. But they are outlaws against the laws of physics. There's no way to square these sets of numbers. If they carry out their business plan, the planet tanks. And the numbers are astonishing. I mean, a company like Exxon, one company with one board of directors, has in its reserves 7% of the carbon necessary to take us past 2 degrees. One company can do 7% of the work necessary to tank the planet. Here's my old friend and colleague who really helped launch all this, Naomi Klein, talking about it. Well, I told you this was going to be trouble. And I'm glad Aaron is here to...
What the fossil fuel industry is doing is locking us into a future that we can't survive, that humanity cannot survive. And we know this because just at the end of 2012, we heard this from 3 different conservative sources simultaneously. The World Bank, the International Energy Agency, PricewaterhouseCoopers, hardly a hippie outfit, all told us that if we do nothing but more of the same, if we dig up those reserves, we are headed towards 4 to 6 degrees warming Celsius.
Here's a local voice saying much the same thing. Let's see if I can make this work any better. I'm getting better at it. By the end of the evening, we all set.
This here is, if you want to look at Australia, this is one of the major arteries, if not the major arteries, like the aorta of CO2 pollution. It is the biggest, right? And when I see the coal laydown areas and the ambition doubling, what we're talking about is doubling what is already unsustainable. Because we know, that climate change is pushing us into a direction where if we have identified so much fossil fuel in the ground, so much coal in the ground, that if we want to live on this planet, we cannot afford to burn it. It has to stay in the ground. We've had diseased fish. We had crabs with ulcers. We had, and the most pervasive one would have been the fish with the red bellies. So they had a red rash. Almost every species in the harbour had a red rash, and that was at the it started just after or around the time when they were doing the first of the dredging, backhoe dredging, through the acid sulfate material. The reality is that it's not our problem. It's not our generation's problem. We are the consumers. We're the ones that are taking from our future generation. Our children and their children are going to be looking back and saying, why didn't they do something about this? Because we know the science is on the table. We know that this is dangerous.
You get what they're saying, and it's the key thing here, that if we're going to deal with this problem, the only way to square this math is to make sure that something like 80% of the carbon reserves that we know about around the world stay underground, never get dug up, never get burned, okay? And one of the reasons that it's really important, as Blair said right at the beginning, to be in Australia is precisely because Australia plays such a large role in this. This is just one of the coal basins that people are talking, the Galilee Valley, that people are talking about digging up and burning in Australia. And if that one basin gets put into full production, it has enough carbon in it to take up about 7% of that 565 gigaton carbon budget. Just that one small valley. If all the coal development that is currently planned in Australia goes into effect, and the coal is not the red, but just the smaller gray areas, if just that coal gets developed, it fills up 30% of the space between our planet and 2 degrees, okay? Australia is a wonderful country, but it doesn't get to fill up. It can't, in any fair or rational world, take up a third of the space that humanity has left between us and catastrophe. There's a dozen other places around the world that have similar size deposits of carbon. My country, Canada, Venezuela. We work in all these places to try and make sure that this stuff never gets dug up because we're already way past the point where we should be. We're already in serious, serious trouble. Here's David Caroli again, just talking about what's happened so far in Australia with 1 degree, before we've dug up all this other stuff and started burning it. Here's where we are now.
For Australia, it means a dramatic increase in extreme weather events, major impacts including increases in drought, increases in heat waves. We've only had less than 1 degree of warming so far, so we're talking about 4 times more, or even more than that, increases in extreme weather events, in adverse impacts from climate change. Continued exports of coal from Australia push the world into the worst case scenario. The Great Barrier Reef will be doomed to extinction due to climate change, warming of the ocean temperatures, and acidification of the oceans due to more carbon dioxide. The Murray-Darling Basin is already being affected by reduced river flows in the Murray and the Darling. Increases in temperature are leading to increases in evaporation, and that means less water. The changes in the rainfall patterns due to climate change are also reducing the stream flow in many rivers, particularly in the Murray-Darling region. Investment in digging up coal is an investment in making climate change worse and making the impacts of more extreme weather and sea level rise worse for Australia. It is not a good decision.
Worse for Australia and worse for the world. This stuff now happens someplace around this planet every single day. As we're meeting here today, people in California are desperately trying to fight a wildfire that's already sent people from 1,100 homes off fleeing to try to get ahead of the blaze. Fire season comes months earlier in California than it did 10, 20, 30 years ago. You guys know a little bit about that. I remember so well that horrible day in Melbourne when the fire swept through. Also today, along the Danube and the other rivers of Central Europe, we're seeing record flood after record rainfall over the last few days. Right now, there are people working as hard as they can to try and keep the subway system in Prague from being inundated like the one in New York was last October. They just evacuated every animal in the Prague Zoo, moved them to higher ground in an effort to keep them from drowning. We did a day last spring at 350.org where we asked people around the world who had already felt the sting of climate change to kind of rally in those places. We're used to doing these big days of action, but even we were shocked by how many people responded in how many places demonstrate. Day starts, you know, in the Pacific. So the very first pictures came from the Marshall Islands, underwater on their coral reef. Coral reef that, like all coral reefs, being eaten away by the hotter, more acid water. But the picture, you would think in Afghanistan people had other things to worry about right now. But the fact that the Kabul River is drying up, well, look, those guys are in the part of Pakistan where the Indus River flooded in 2010, covered a quarter of the country with water. 20 million people were forced from their homes. What's the population of Australia? Essentially, the population of Australia had to leave their homes as that river flooded. Okay? And the same, you know, all over the world, forest fire and sea level rise. And, it's incredibly difficult and depressing to see those things. The good news, and it's very good news, is that we understand now, in a way that we didn't even a few years ago, what we need to do to get around it, how we might change the world so we could go in the direction that we needed to go in. When environmentalists talked about renewable energy 20 years ago, it was with our fingers crossed. We knew it wasn't quite ready. We were hoping it would come online, and it has in the places that took it seriously, that really got to work, and they're few but powerful. We've seen amazing things. There were days last summer in Germany, the one big country, the one non-Scandinavian country that really took all this seriously. There were days last summer when the Germans generated half the power they used from solar panels within their borders. And that's in Germany, okay? Sort of foggy and Wagnerian, you know. Think what a country could do that had the sunshine of, oh, I don't know, Australia, you know. The possibilities are limitless, and not just in the developed world. I did a piece for National Geographic a couple of years ago on China and energy, and spent a lot. Now, China's made a lot of mistakes. They've emulated a lot of what we did in the West, and they've been sold a lot of our technology and a lot of our coal to do that emulation. But they've also done some pretty remarkable things in China. If you go there, and I know many of you have been, one of the things you notice quickly is the number of houses with solar hot water panels on the roofs. There are cities where almost every house has them, and in fact, a quarter of Chinese homes, 250 million people, get their hot water from the roof. That's quite remarkable. And it's not because they have better technology than other people do. In fact, that really came home to me one day when I spent the day with the engineer who'd built the biggest of these solar hot water companies, a guy named Huang Ming. He was now a very rich engineer. And the end of this long day of talking about solar panels, he took me into his private museum. And, you know, there was the usual pictures of him shaking hands with important and famous people, but the pride of place in this museum was a solar panel, an old kind of rusting solar hot water panel. I said, you know what that is? No, what is that? It's my favorite thing. That was one of the solar panels that Jimmy Carter put on the White House in 1979, okay? And Ronald Reagan took down in 1985 because he wanted manlier forms of energy than that, you know? And for me, it was a reminder, a deep reminder that our problem is less to do with technology than it is with political will, with summoning the power to make sure that we do the right thing. And that's what we're going to talk about in the second half of this in just a minute. But first, I want to make absolutely sure that I have hammered home these numbers as best I possibly can, okay, so that you can do this mathematical calculation for anybody and explain to them. So I'm a writer, I'm going to use a metaphor, an analogy, okay? Here's how it's going to work. As it turns out, I like beer a good deal and tend to drink some, one or two, almost every night. I would have one now if somebody gave me one, okay? So someone should. Lord Mayor, what's the, if you'd like to join me in one, you could. You know the laws in this country. What's the blood alcohol level you're allowed to have before you're 0.05? Okay. Open one of these for me and one for the Lord Mayor, would you? Here you are. Okay. So let's stop here for a second. Here's the thing. Cheers. Here's the thing. 0.05. It's a limit like that 565 billion tons, 565 gigatons. And I might be able to drink 3 of these in the course of a night, okay, and stay within that limit. You're considerably smaller than I am, so you might want to stop at 2. Yes, okay. Maybe 2, maybe 3. The trouble is, the fossil fuel industry is just party animals, man. And they have 30 beers, you know, opened up on the table, ready for each of us to drink. Our colleagues here, Hayden and Vivian and Alex and Matthew and Emma and Sally and Emily and Alana from the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, who do great work. They're helping just illustrate what it is we're up against. Now, I know that there are a few hard drinkers in this country, okay, who might be willing to make the attempt, you know, in the name of science or something, to see how it went. But think what we would say about them if they managed to somehow get down all 30 beers, and then think about the planet, okay? We'd say that they would be ripped and totaled and trashed and wasted. That's what's going to happen to our Earth unless we rein in this industry fast. So look at that, think of that, and imagine that as what it is that it means to take something that's good and have way, way, way more of it than a system can absorb, okay? Turn it into something bad, and that's what we are on the verge of doing. If you can remember that, then you can remember this math and really understand on a visceral level exactly where we are. Thank you all enormously for that, and thank you enormously for that. Now, as they get rid of that beer for a minute, we're going to pause for a minute. Don't go anywhere. We're going to pause just to have a few of these questions that you all and Professor, we're going to go forward and help us with it. He had you write out these in advance simply to make sure that there were no difficult ones that would stump me, okay? Exactly it, yeah. I made it through Q&A last night, you know, so I didn't, I wanted to take no chances tonight, you know, on the, but if there's a few there that we, because when we're done, we're going to get to the important part of the evening, which is what we're going to do, okay, and how it is we're going to make a difference here.
And thanks to everybody for the questions. So the first one, with the recent news that we've already reached 400 parts per million, can climate change be capped at 2 degrees? And if not, what are the likely consequences?
Well, we're at the point where 2 degrees is about the best we can hope for. We've raised temperature 1 degree already, but that hasn't yet fully expressed all the carbon that we've put into the atmosphere. There's a lag time between when the carbon goes in and when the temperature goes up because the heat's stored in the oceans for a while. So we're already at least at 1.5 degrees and closing in on 2, and there's obviously a ton of momentum in this system. We'd have to do everything right from this point to stay below 2 degrees. It's probably just doable, you know. And there's been the tiniest ray of good news in the last few weeks, 1 or 2 studies indicating that if we did everything right, you know, the physics might cut us a little bit of a break, that maybe the sensitivity of climate isn't quite as high as most of the studies indicate. So let's hope that that news is right and we have some hope at this point, but only if we get to work with enormous speed, get off coal and gas and oil far faster than any government currently plans.
You mentioned physics. That's the next question. Most Australians have had no exposure to physics, even at school. So the concepts involved in climate change are completely unknown to them, long and short wave electromagnetic radiation, etc. How to overcome this? And there's a PS here, humble apologies for the disgraceful behavior of Senator Cory Bernardi. Calling you mad. We do have a few civilized people in our government, but not many.
You have many civilized people in your government, and this is, you know, this, and I was actually grateful to him for kind of setting things up last night. You know, it was good to look. You don't need to understand the deep physics of climate change. This stuff is to actually do the work of climate scientists is fairly deep. It's not impossible, and in fact, we've known about it a long time. It was Arrhenius, the great Swedish chemist in the 1890s, who first did the kind of back-of-the-envelope calculations for how much temperature would go up due to the radiative forcing of CO2. And those back-of-the-envelope calculations are remarkably close to what the supercomputers tell us now. You do need to know, what you do need to know is well within the ability of people to grasp. When we started 350.org, there were a number of people who said, oh, what a terrible name, it's too technical and complicated, no one could ever understand it, you know, on and on and on. And I thought, no, I mean, we chose it mostly because we wanted to work around the world, and Arabic numerals cross linguistic boundaries, you know. But I was pretty sure people would be able to understand it simply because we're good at numbers, you know. We get the fact that if there's a line and you go above the line and it's too much, then that's trouble. It's like when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, your cholesterol level is too high. You're in the zone where people are going to have heart attacks. Not many people say to the doctor, well, I need an entire disquisition on the lipid system, you know, and only the real idiots go home and look all over the web for some, you know, website says, oh, cholesterol does not exist, you know. So, there we are.
Back to Q&A last night.
One more, yes.
So how did you feel listening to the climate deniers on Q&A last night and hearing people applaud them?
Well, look, the richest industry in the world is, by definition, going to come with defenders, you know. That's what it means to have that kind of power and access and influence. And I think, actually, I'd much rather have it out in the open. The good news is, the polling data shows that most Australians, like most Americans, understand that we have a problem. The polling has shown that that number is steadily increasing, and the reason that it's steadily increasing is because, good an educator as I might be or you might be, Mother Nature is a better one. And the lessons that she's been sending are harsher and stronger. I mean, the volume keeps getting turned up. And we watched from a distance what happened in Australia this summer and saw, you know, the temperature rise through the roof and saw those amazing, horrifying pictures of that family clinging to the bottom of a dock so they wouldn't get burned in the wildfire. And at a certain point, pretty much everybody's going to know what's going on. At this point, and this is the very good segue back into what we need to talk about now, at this point, the real strategic goal is not to convince the last climate deniers. My sense is there is no study on Earth that would convince that fellow Mr. Bernardi, you know, because his opposition is rooted in ideology, not science, okay? It's not to convince the last of those. It's to take those of us who know what the problem is and get us off the sidelines and on to the front lines in this fight. And so that's what we will talk about now. Thank you very much. Very much. Okay. One of the things about climate change is that for a long time, we kind of told ourselves that we were the problem, okay? That if only we changed our light bulbs or whatever, this problem wouldn't exist, that it was really us and our greed and, you know, and there's a certain amount of truth in that. We are all too used to using too much energy, too thoughtlessly, whatever else. But Most people in this room and most people on this planet don't actually care where that energy comes from, would not mind if it came from a solar panel or a wind turbine, instead might like that, okay? The people who don't like it are the fossil fuel industry, okay? And they have done everything they can to prevent change from happening. They've used their money in this country and in my country to make sure that the politics never change, that we never take. And when people dare to do even small good things, like the price on carbon that you all adopted, they launch an all-out offensive to roll it back, to make sure that there isn't that. Once in a while, they try to talk a good game, a few of them anyway, and say that they're doing good. A few years ago, BP announced that its initials were going to now stand for Beyond Petroleum, okay? And they invested lots of money in a new logo, and a little tiny bit of money in the sun and the wind, but then after a few years they stopped doing that. They sold off those divisions and went back to their core business, okay, because it was making so much money, because in most of the world there's no price on carbon, because they're allowed to throw out their waste for free. They make money hand over fist, and it keeps them. Well, here's the CEO of Exxon, the biggest oil company on earth, a guy named Rex Tillerson. He makes $100,000 a day, okay, and he did finally last year admit for the first time, first CEO of Exxon to say, yes, true, global warming is real. Come on, say it.
It's an engineering problem, and it has engineering solutions.
Let's go back. I want you to hear the whole thing. There we go.
And clearly there's going to be an impact.
Okay,
so
good.
I'm not disputing that increasing CO2 emissions in the atmosphere is going to have an impact. It'll have a warming impact.
Okay, good, thank you. But, you know, since doing anything about it would go straight to the bottom line, he quickly adds...
It's an engineering problem, and it has engineering solutions.
What kind of engineering solutions were you thinking of? You know, what did you have in mind?
Changes to weather patterns that move crop production areas around, we'll adapt to that.
Not really. You know, all respect, but crop production areas are what most of us call farms, all right? And we already have farms everywhere that there is decent soil. Yes, Exxon has helped make it too hot to grow corn in Iowa last year, but that doesn't mean that you can just move that whole operation up to Siberia where they've melted the tundra and start over again. There's no soil. The corn will just flop over, okay? If you make $100,000 a day, the 40% increase in the price of corn last year, thanks to that drought, that's no big deal. But for most of the people we work with, it is a big deal. And that's what we got to go to work on now. You remember what I said earlier about drunk driving, this analogy, okay? What we're going to try and do is take away, as it were, the kind of social license of this industry. We think that they have behaved recklessly enough that they should begin to lose the kind of veneer of respectability that allows them to keep dominating our political life. We need to understand that in very fundamental ways now, they're no different from the tobacco industry, which for decades and for millions of lives lied about the effects of their products, all right? And so that means that these companies, and they are many and diverse, you know, it means that we're going to have to figure out how to take them on. And there are a few ways that we're going to do that. One tool that we can use is divestment. We can ask or demand that institutions and individuals sell their stock in these companies. The logic is pretty simple. We can't avoid, each of us, using a certain amount of fossil fuel. That's the way that the world works right now. But we can avoid profiting from it, you know. If it's wrong to wreck the climate, then it's wrong to profit from that wreckage. And we need to sort of take that step and use it effectively to make a difference, to begin to weaken the political power of those industries. This tactic in my country worked really exactly one time in a big way. It's been tried one time in a big way, and that was about a generation ago when the question was apartheid in South Africa. There's a little young people in this room who may not remember those days, may not remember that it was only a generation ago that we still had institutionalized, legalized racial government in one of the big countries on this earth. And people around the planet, including in Australia, came together to try and be in solidarity with people in South Africa, people in communities, on campuses, churches, synagogues, mosques, launched a big divestment campaign in America where colleges and universities, say, have to have their own stock portfolios and endowments in order to run their operations. They convinced 155 of those campuses to sell their stock. Pension funds, superannuation funds, shed their stock. City and county and state governments sold their shares. And what do you know? It really worked. It really helped. In June of 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and the first foreign trip he took was to the United States, and he did not go first to the White House. Okay? He went first to California to thank students at the University of California who had forced the sale of $3 billion worth of apartheid-tainted stock, all right? And he said, we fought for our own liberation, but in this globally connected world, we could not have done it without you, which makes it all the more powerful and all the more significant to listen to his great colleague and accomplice in that work, Desmond Tutu, one of our great heroes who's helped at 350.org from the day that we were founded. And here's what he said just a couple of months ago. Listen carefully. He's a little older now, and it's a little hard to hear what, but this is one maybe, arguably, certainly one of this handful of greatest people alive on this planet today.
The divestment movement played a key role in helping liberate South Africa. The corporations understood the logic of money even when they weren't swayed by the dictates of morality. Climate change is a deeply moral issue too, of course. Here in Africa, we see the dreadful suffering of people from worsening drought, from rising food prices, from floods, even though they've done nothing to cause the situation. Once again, we can join together as a world and put pressure where it counts.
Investment in fossil fuel companies is very, very wide in Australia. Most people don't realise that their superannuation funds are actually supporting an enormous amount of coal mining. Investment in banks, investments in mining companies, investments in many different areas are directly supporting increased mining of coal and other fossil fuels in Australia. So a key solution to reducing the mining of coal is to divest, to reduce the investments in fossil fuel companies.
Gina is the richest woman in the world, not because she has money in the bank, it's because she has coal in the ground. Right now, we know the science is clear. And there's no doubt in my mind that the company executives, the people who run these companies are bright people. They don't get to their positions because they don't understand how the world works. These people know. They know what is happening, right? Yet they choose to facilitate their companies in generating or pulling this carbon out of the ground. Now, once they acknowledge, once these...
Oh. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Mr. Ahrens. But you get the point. And I want you to bear in mind what it was that Desmond Tutu said. To just remember that some of this work we have to do is on our own account because of the places we live are being damaged right around us. But some of it, a lot of it, is on the account of those people on this planet who have done nothing, and I mean literally nothing, to cause that problem. The continent of Africa produces about 1% of the carbon dioxide that spewed forth from this earth, and yet they are paying an enormous price already. People living close to the margin being forced off that margin. And so we go to work. We go to work on these things. And it is with great pride tonight that in Australia we launch this Go Fossil Free campaign here in Australia. And there are a lot of things that we need you working on here. You can ask your super fund if they're invested in fossil fuel, and if they are, you can consider moving your money. You can put your bank on notice. The big 4 banks in Australia fund coal and gas projects in this country. They threaten those ecosystems like the Great Barrier Reef. If they won't move, then perhaps you should think about it. We need you to start local campaigns to get your church, your university, your local council to divest. When we went around the United States in November, doing this same talk, by the time we were done on 380 college campuses in America, there were divestment fights underway. The New York Times said it was the fastest growing student movement in decades. Already 5 of those schools have divested. They've been joined by 10 city governments around America, including cities like Seattle and San Francisco. It hadn't occurred to me before, but purely in alliterative terms, Sydney should be next, you know, in this lineup. This is what we need you to go to work with, and you can easily get involved in this work by going to 350.org. Say it again. Aaron Packard, stand up and tell people where they're supposed to go.
It'll come up on the slide as well, but gofossilfree.org/Australia.
Gofossilfree.org/AU/Australia.
The full word. And there's beautiful handouts in your chairs which has the links as well.
All right. Thank you very much. I had a great Aaron and I have been working together for a very long time, right from the start of 350. He's a Kiwi, but don't hold that against him. And he's coming here to Melbourne to organize full-time for a while and join our great crew here in Australia. I had the great pleasure this afternoon of sitting down with the heads of the Uniting Church in Australia. And with great courage, they divested their fossil fuel stocks a few weeks ago. And that is the kind of both moral and practical stand that we badly need. If you're trying to explain to somebody why it might be a good idea, even if they weren't a particularly moral person, to sell these stocks, what you need to keep reminding them is that there is a bubble. That's what we were describing before. That's what it means when they have 5 times as much carbon as they can burn. HSBC and Citigroup said a few weeks ago that if the world ever took that 2-degree target seriously, if we ever set to work on it, you would have to cut in half the share values of the fossil fuel companies. Now you know why they fight so hard to keep us from taking it seriously. And now you know why it might also be good practical investment advice to get out before things got any worse, okay? So the divestment thing is really important. And I think and I hope that you all will sign up to help and that you will figure out how to do this, because, you know, you need to do it yourselves. You need to build these kind of campaigns yourselves. We're a small outfit, and we can help and we can provide materials and resources, but these sort of things have to spring up all over the place, and I know that they can, and I know that they will. And I also know that it's not the only thing that we're going to need to do. I want to end by talking just a little bit about the other things that have to happen, about the ways that we have to raise the stakes just a little bit here. In fact, maybe I'll show this one last clip of video, a little bit about this fight over the Keystone Pipeline that's become the biggest environmental fight in North America over the last couple of years. This was a plan that 2 years ago, when we started work on it, was considered absolutely inevitable, a done deal, ready to go. It comes from a pool of carbon much like these huge Australian coal deposits, so big that if we burn it, then we can't really deal with our climate problem. And so we set out to try to do something about it. And because people didn't really know about it or weren't taking it seriously enough, the thing that we set to work doing was well, to sort of use the techniques and the tools that people like Gandhi and Dr. King pioneered in order to help draw attention to the moral urgency of the situation that we faced.
August was the beginning of the people's veto of this whole proposal. We will never give up until the very idea of Keystone XL is dead and buried.
Tar sands are the turning point in our fossil fuel addiction. The fundamental fact is that as long as fossil fuels are the cheapest energy, they will continue to be used. The solution is to begin to put a price on carbon emissions.
We, the American people, should not have to sacrifice our land and water to meet TransCanada's bottom line.
We stand here right now because we are at our lunch counter moment for the 21st century. President Obama, do the right thing.
We are at a tipping point in America's history for this environmental movement. If you are going to be risking arrest, you're going to be lining up on this sidewalk.
When I saw the acts of civil disobedience in front of the White House, people saying, I will not let this Keystone Pipeline be built. I won't let us be committed to an energy plan based on fossil fuels. You know, the people that got arrested in front of the White House, those were not people who were all self-identified environmentalists. Those were farmers and ranchers. Those were people from indigenous communities. Those were business leaders. Those were grandparents and moms and dads. We're really starting to see an expansion of the group of people that are fighting this fight, but we have a lot further to go on that.
You know, I think civil disobedience arises when what we all know to be right and good is out of sync with the politicians who govern us. And so there was civil disobedience, of course, over the human rights movement. There was civil disobedience over the Vietnam War. And now there will inevitably be civil disobedience about climate change until politicians give us the policies that we need.
One of the major things I've learned is that we can all do something as individuals, and we can work together to make change so that we have a positive future, and we're not looking at getting to something like 450 parts per million.
I think it's impossible to read and think about this issue for any length of time without becoming radicalized. I think anybody who ponders it, who realizes that we are willingly sleepwalking to a destroyed planet, gets angry about that stuff and wants to change it. It's a completely normal response.
Now, I promised we'd stop at 7:30, but I'm going to go 2 minutes over, and I just want to finish by talking a little bit about that work that we did in Washington, because it's still very much in my mind. I hadn't been to jail before, and I spent 3 days in Central Cell Block in D.C., which was about as much fun as it sounds like it would be, but it was not the end of the world. The end of the world is the end of the world, and that's why we do what we need to do. This was the largest civil disobedience action in 30 years about any issue in the United States. 1,253 people went to jail. And it was the reason, more than anything else, why we've been able for 2 years to block that pipeline. Now, it may get approved. All oil industry in the United States works on nothing else at this point but trying to force its approval. But if nothing else, we have for 2 years blocked it and kept 500 million barrels of oil in the ground and served notice that the fossil fuel industry no longer has a free ride going forward. There were 2 things about those arrests that I want to I was sharing them before with the young people from the AYCC. That I think were important and that stuck in my mind and that were a little odd and different. First one, I wrote the letter asking people to come and get arrested. And it's a hard kind of letter to write, okay? One of the things that I said in it, and I look around at the diversity of this audience, which is wonderful, one of the things I said in it was, this is one case where young people, college students, should not have to be the cannon fodder in this fight. They've done most of the leading, and they'll do most of the leading going forward. But if you're 22 right now, it's possible that an arrest record in our economy is not the absolute best thing for your resume, okay? One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, you know? And so it was very nice to see a lot of the people who came forward to Washington to get arrested had hairlines sort of like mine, you know. We did not say to people as they got arrested, how old are you? Because that would be rude. But cleverly, we said, who was president when you were born? And the 2 largest cohorts came from the FDR and the Truman administrations, okay, which was really good. It was really good. It was really good to see elders acting like elders, you know, taking some of the lead in dealing with the problem that we all caused. The second thing about those protests, and here I take just the slightest difference from my great friend and colleague, John Cawley, the other thing about them was, we told everybody that if they wanted to get arrested, we wanted to see them in a necktie or a dress, okay? Not because we are big, I mean, I live in the state of Vermont, okay, which is, I mean, it's even less formal than Australia, okay? I mean, I put on neckties for funerals, that's about it, you know? But there was a point we wanted to make, a visual point that undergirds pretty much everything that I have told you tonight. And that is that there is, in fact, nothing radical about what we're asking for, not a thing. Last night on the TV show, the senator and the man from the Financial Review tried to sort of intimidate, oh, this is madness that you're talking about standing up to the fossil fuel industry. Tried to make it seem as if it was a kind of radical notion, but in fact, and the reason I pushed back is because there's nothing radical at all about it. All we're asking for is a world that works a little bit like the one we were born into, a world that works the way that the world worked for all the 10,000 years of human history that we know about. There is nothing That's, if you think about it, a pretty conservative demand, okay? Radicals work at coal companies. If you are willing to alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere in ways that scientists have demonstrated will cause ruin, and whose ruin we can now see in the Arctic, in all those places suffering the effects. If you're willing to do that, to make your fortune, to build your Titanic, to do all the things that, coal barons like to do, then you're engaged in the most radical act that any human being's ever engaged in, altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere. It is our job to stand up to that radicalism and stand up to it now before it does any more damage. And here just let me end by being completely honest. I'm not, an organizer by background or anything. I mean, you can tell just by listening to me that I'm not a born orator. I can hardly run a PowerPoint. This was not what I've set out with my life to do, and probably most of you neither. But it's what we're called upon to do now at this point, and we're called upon to do it without any guarantee that we are going to win. There is no guarantee like that. It's not like other social issues where it's been clear that though the struggle would be long and hard, eventually things would come out the right way. There's no guarantee of that here, because if we don't win fast, we don't win. The physics of this are daunting. And so I don't know if we're going to win, but I do know, having been all over the world in the last few years, spewing carbon behind me, having been all over the world, I do know that in every portion of this planet, including, maybe especially in the places that have done the least to cause this problem, there are now people willing to fight. And it's clear that we're going to fight. And that's a good feeling. And I got to say, though I can be pessimistic from time to time, looking around this room tonight, there's a part of me that kind of likes our odds. Thank you guys so much for coming here tonight. One more thing to do. No. One more thing to do. 2, 350. Thank you all so much. Now make sure you're signed up and ready to go to work.